Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the twilight of 1945 Europe, a continent still smoking from war, where every sound echoes too loudly in the emptiness. You're standing in what used to be a street, though now it's only rubble and splintered beams. The air smells of ash, wet concrete, and something older, the exhaustion of a civilization that has burned itself out. You can almost feel the ghosts of the past week drifting through the ruins. The silence after Hitler's suicide, the shock of unconditional surrender, the hollow space where certainty used to live. You probably won't survive this, at least not as the same person. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from, city and local time, so we can map our little nighttime classroom across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's August 1945. The guns have gone silent, and the Reich that once promised 1,000 years has lasted barely 12. What remains is not triumph or vengeance. It's chaos. Millions of refugees move westward like rivers of the displaced. Trains crammed with civilians snake through bomb-flattened stations. In one carriage, you find yourself sitting opposite a woman clutching a porcelain doll. She hasn't spoken since Dresden burned. In another corner, a soldier without boots stares out the window, whispering to no one. Germany is no longer a country. It's an open wound. Above you, the victors gather. The United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, deciding who will sew the wound shut and how deep the stitches should go. At the Potsdam Conference, held in the leafy suburbs of Berlin, the map of the future is redrawn with the ease of a pen stroke. To your left sits Truman, practical and poker-faced. To your right, Churchill for a time, later replaced by Clement Attlee. Across from them, the inscrutable figure of Stalin, whose pipe smoke curls like a new iron curtain before anyone dares name it. The Allies agree. Germany will be divided into 4 occupation zones. The capital, Berlin, symbolic heart of the beast, will be carved the same way. But beneath the formal smiles and toasts, tension already crackles. The Western powers imagine reconstruction and democratic reform. Stalin imagined security, a belt of friendly states protecting the Soviet Union from ever again facing a German invasion. And so, without asking you, or any of the 16 million souls living east of the Elbe, the future is decided. Your town, your factory, your home will fall under Soviet control. You've just become a citizen of something that doesn't yet exist, the Eastern Zone. In those early weeks, the Red Army is everywhere. Their trucks rumble through narrow streets, soldiers in worn uniforms directing columns of POWs. You see them entering abandoned plants, dismantling entire assembly lines, labeling crates Repression, USSR. Locomotives, turbines, even light bulb machines all vanish eastward. It feels like watching your own muscles peeled away while still breathing. The logic is simple. Germany caused the war. Germany must pay. Yet as the equipment disappears, so do the jobs, and soon the food. The ration card becomes the new national flag, a square of paper dictating whether you'll have bread tonight or not. Everywhere, whispers. Who collaborated? Who served the Nazis? And who now collaborates with the Soviets? The line between guilt and survival blurs like chalk in the rain. One day a neighbor vanishes, taken for questioning. The next, a former party member reappears with a red star pinned to his lapel and a confident smile. Historians still argue whether this period was vengeance or purification, whether denazification in the East genuinely aimed to uproot fascism or simply replace one authoritarian ideology with another. But to you, standing in a queue for powdered potatoes, it hardly matters. Authority is authority. Boots are boots. Still, The early days have their strange optimism. Posters sprout like weeds on crumbling walls. Never again war. Build socialism. New life from the ruins. Children sweep streets with brooms too large for their hands. Women salvage bricks to rebuild schools. A quirky but real fact. In some districts, the first provisional governments held meetings in basements of half-destroyed breweries, because those were the only rooms with intact tables. Imagine signing decrees on damp wood that still smells of hops and smoke. You almost laugh, except laughter costs energy you don't have. As months pass, the occupier's tone hardens. Land reform begins. Large estates are broken up and distributed to peasants under the slogan, Junkerland in Bauernhand, land of the nobles into the hands of the farmers. At first it feels revolutionary, then the quotas arrive. Suddenly the state sets how much grain you must deliver, how much seed you can keep. Freedom wears overalls and carries a clipboard. You realize the war's vocabulary, orders, production, obedience, never really ended. It just changed uniforms. Meanwhile, in the western zones, rumors filter through. The Americans are organizing relief packages, rebuilding industry. Some people start calling it the chocolate zone because kids returning from the West bring actual candy, a mythical luxury that melts too fast to prove it was ever real. You hold one tin of coffee traded on the black market and stare at it as though it were a religious relic. The difference between East and West is still just policy on paper, but already it tastes different. Stalin's administrators move quickly to reshape society. Schools purge textbooks of Nazi ideology, but what replaces it is another form of orthodoxy. Marx, Engels, and the shining promise of the planned economy. Teachers are retrained, newspapers nationalized, churches politely reminded to stay apolitical. If you're a student, you find your curriculum suddenly obsessed with class consciousness. If you're a factory worker, you're told that your sweat is now revolutionary. It's hard not to roll your eyes, but you do it discreetly. The walls have new ears. The hunger winter of 1946 hits next. Fuel is scarce, and snowdrifts pile against windowless ruins. People burn furniture, textbooks, anything that catches. Your breath fogs indoors. An older neighbor dies quietly, wrapped in newspapers featuring triumphant speeches about production goals. Outside, Soviet trucks rumble by, carrying the last machinery from what used to be your town's engine works. You can't help thinking, if this is liberation, what does captivity look like? And yet, there's resilience. Germans, East or West, are absurdly good at surviving bureaucratic apocalypse. You learn to stretch ration coupons, barter a pair of boots for 3 kilos of potatoes, and trade gossip like currency. A friend whispers that in Berlin, if you cross to the American sector, you can buy a cigarette for 1 mark, or exchange it for an entire loaf back east. It's almost a science, this dance of scarcity. One historian later called it the second economy before the first had even started. You call it Tuesday. By 1946, the zones are solidifying, invisible borders hardening into habit. On one side of the Elbe, Coca-Cola appears. On the other, slogans about collectivism. And you, small as an ant under this grand geopolitical experiment, just try to keep warm. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering whether ideology really matters when all you want is butter. But history, as usual, doesn't wait for you to finish that thought. Somewhere in a smoke-filled Soviet office, officials are planning a political marriage that will soon reshape your entire existence. The merger of 2 German parties into one obedient machine. For now, though, you sit by a cracked window, the radio murmuring static, and watch the gray dawn crawl over a landscape that can't yet decide if it's free. You wake to the sound of boots again. Not the thunderous march of the Wehrmacht this time, but the dull, steady rhythm of the Red Army patrolling your street. The war is over, yet somehow, soldiers are still everywhere. Their language is strange, their laughter foreign, and the smell of cheap tobacco follows them like an aura. Soviet trucks idle in front of factories, and cranes loom like skeletons over dismantled roofs. What little machinery survived the bombings is now being disassembled, piece by piece, and sent eastward as reparations. One day, the factory whistle that once announced your shift simply doesn't blow anymore. You stand outside the gate, surrounded by other workers who don't quite know whether to wait or walk away. The Soviet commandants are efficient in their own grim way. They arrive with ledgers and translators, barking orders that echo through empty workshops. The local German engineers, men who once designed aircraft engines or ball bearings, are now ordered to supervise their own undoing. Crates are labeled in Cyrillic, sealed with red wax, and loaded onto freight trains bound for Minsk, Kiev, Moscow. It's called demontage, dismantling, and within months, entire towns lose their industrial heartbeat. Historians still argue whether this massive removal crippled East Germany's long-term recovery or merely equalized wartime devastation between East and West. To you, sweating beneath the weight of another crate, it just feels like slow-motion amputation. In the streets, the symbols change faster than the seasons. Nazi eagles are chiseled off walls, replaced by red stars and banners showing Stalin's mustached profile, gazing heroically towards some ideological horizon. Children once forced to salute now chant new slogans in the classroom. The teacher who made them memorize Mein Kampf last year now insists that Marx and Engels were prophets of humanity. You suppress a laugh that could get you reported. You quickly learn that loyalty isn't measured by conviction anymore, only by display. Attend the rallies, nod during speeches, paste the new flag in your window, and maybe you'll be left alone. The people who master this survival theater best are the Blockwarte, the local wardens who monitor every apartment block for signs of reactionary thinking. They're everywhere, at the baker's, in the post office, sitting in the tram. They keep lists. You start censoring your own dinner conversations out of habit. The prisons fill again, though the prisoners wear different labels this time. Nazi collaborator, bourgeois sympathizer, enemy of the people. The irony doesn't escape anyone. The cells once used by the Gestapo are now operated by the NKVD. Sometimes you hear muffled cries from the basement of the local police station, and everyone just turns up their radio a little louder. In a grim twist of history, the instruments of terror simply swap hands while the tune continues. And yet, there's another side to it. For many ordinary Germans, especially those who never belonged to the Nazi Party, the Soviets' arrival also means an end to constant bombing and chaos. For the first time in years, trains start running again. Soviet officers organize soup kitchens for children. In small villages, Red Army doctors treat wounds that German hospitals can't. A quirky but true story circulates from Saxony. A Soviet major, once a violinist in Leningrad, starts giving free music lessons to local kids using instruments salvaged from bombed churches. Even in an occupation, humanity flickers stubbornly through the cracks. Still, fear is the prevailing currency. One night, trucks come for the politically unreliable. You watch from behind curtains as your former supervisor, a quiet man who always shared cigarettes, is led away in handcuffs. His wife stands barefoot in the snow, shouting his name until someone drags her inside. The next morning, her apartment door is sealed with wax. No explanation, no trial, just absence. The Soviets call it Operation Osawakum, the transfer of German specialists to the USSR to help rebuild Soviet industry. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and skilled workers vanish almost overnight, taken east with their families. Historians still debate how voluntary those invitations really were. The official line says cooperation. The reality feels more like exile. You start sleeping with your boots beside the bed, just in case. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine roars to life. Loudspeakers in the town square play patriotic songs, extolling friendship between the liberating Red Army and the German working class. Posters show smiling farmers shaking hands with soldiers under slogans like "Von der Sowjetunion lernen, heißt Siegen lernen." To learn from the Soviet Union is to learn victory. You roll your eyes, but quietly. One joke too loud could be fatal. A whispered one-liner circulates among factory workers. The Russians took everything except our debts. They left those for socialism. The Soviet administrators encouraged local communists to form committees, Antifa bureaus, to root out fascist remnants. The name Antifa sounds oddly modern to your ears, though it's 1946. Meetings are held in smoky halls filled with slogans, speeches, and the endless clatter of typewriters. There's talk of land reform, women's equality, and worker councils, ideas that, at least on paper, seem noble. For the young and idealistic, it's intoxicating, a promise that from the ashes, a fairer world could emerge. You can almost believe it when a new anthem plays, Auferstanden aus Ruinen, risen from the ruins. But beneath the rhetoric, another consolidation is taking place. The Soviets aren't content to leave German politics messy. Two major parties exist in their zone: the Communists, KPD, loyal to Moscow, and the Social Democrats, SPD, who still dream of a more moderate socialism. In 1946, Stalin orders their unification. To the public, it's framed as a grassroots merger, a brotherly handshake across the left. In truth, it's coercion. SPD leaders who resist are blackmailed, arrested, or quietly disappear. The new creation is called the Socialist Unity Party, Sozialistische Einheitspartei Deutschlands, or SED. You attend one of the rallies celebrating this union. Red banners flap in the wind, and a choir sings of unity and progress. Somewhere deep inside, you sense the irony. Unity, born from fear. The SED's emblem gleams on every podium. Two clasped hands, one slightly larger, symbolizing Moscow's guiding strength. Historians still argue whether the SED's birth was the moment East Germany lost its autonomy or merely formalized a fate already sealed at Potsdam. To you, standing among thousands chanting slogans you barely believe, it's just another mask in a long masquerade. Within months, the SED begins purging its own ranks. Former SPD members are accused of reformist tendencies and expelled. The party press runs glowing editorials about Stalin's genius and the necessity of democratic centralism. You learn new vocabulary: comrade first secretary, 5-year plan, planned economy. At night, you try to make sense of it all, but the dictionary of survival keeps changing faster than you can memorize it. One quirky detail from this era: the Soviets introduce anti-fascist schools for adults, teaching everything from Marxist economics to Russian language basics. Attendance is voluntary, which means you attend. Sitting on a hard wooden bench, you watch your instructor draw a huge hammer and sickle on the chalkboard. His accent thick, his passion undeniable, he insists this symbol represents equality and peace. You think quietly that it also looks suspiciously like a weapon. By late 1947, the new order feels permanent. Streets are renamed after Soviet heroes: Karl Marx Alley, Stalin Alley, Rosa Luxemburg Platz. Statues rise where ruins once stood. The scent of wet cement mingles with coal smoke. There's a strange rhythm now to life in the red zone. Predictable, controlled, gray. And yet, beneath that gray, a pulse still beats. People falling in love, trading jokes, listening to forbidden jazz on smuggled radios. You begin to sense that surviving here isn't just about obedience. It's about subtle rebellion, quiet laughter, tiny acts of defiance. The Red Army presence starts thinning, replaced by German police wearing new armbands. But you can feel their loyalty isn't to Berlin. it's to Moscow. A Soviet colonel still occupies the mayor's office. Orders still arrive in Russian envelopes. You realize that occupation doesn't always require foreign soldiers, just the illusion that someone is always watching. And so, as 1948 dawns, the ashes of war have hardened into the foundations of a new state. The streets buzz not with hope, but with a kind of resigned rhythm. The West is rebuilding with Marshall Plan dollars. The East rebuilds with slogans. Somewhere, a poet writes that freedom has become a rationed commodity. You can't decide whether he's joking or prophesying. Either way, you keep your head down, your papers in order, and your humor sharp. Because in this red zone, laughter may be the last private property you still own. You wake one morning to the distant clang of church bells echoing through a sky the color of cold iron. The war's rubble still dots the streets, but there's an eerie order to it now, like chaos has been disciplined into neat piles. Posters line every wall. Stern men in work caps, women hoisting wheat sheaves, slogans promising unity, productivity, rebirth. You glance up and recognize the faces, Marx, Engels, and a broad-shouldered Stalin watching you from every corner, like a pantheon of secular saints. And today, the rumors are true. The two main German leftist parties, the Communist Party, KPD, and the Social Democrats, SPD, are being forced to merge. The new entity has a name that sounds both grand and inevitable. Sozialistische Einheitspartei Deutschlands, the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, or simply the SED. You attend the so-called unification rally more out of curiosity than loyalty. The town square has been scrubbed clean, flags hung between cracked facades. A brass band plays, the trumpets slightly out of tune, while local speakers recite the approved lines. Never again division among workers. Unity through socialism. The crowd cheers on cue, though some faces look more resigned than inspired. You clap too, not because you're convinced, but because not clapping is more dangerous. The Soviets stand at the edge of the platform, hands clasped behind their backs, observing like stage directors, ensuring the performance hits every cue. Behind the slogans about equality and democracy, you can sense the deeper motive: control. The KPD, loyal to Moscow, has outmaneuvered the SPD through coercion, propaganda, and plain intimidation. One local SPD leader gives a speech with trembling hands, voice cracking as he pledges unshakable brotherhood with the communists. A few months later, you hear he's been reassigned to a distant administrative post for health reasons. Translation: he disagreed once too often. Historians still debate how much of this merger was genuine idealism and how much was fear. Some argue the SPD's dream of social justice found a twisted echo in Stalin's socialism. Others say it was a shotgun wedding at gunpoint. You just remember the look in people's eyes, a mix of exhaustion and calculation. After 6 years of war and 2 years of occupation, ideology feels like a luxury only the powerful can afford. At the local SED headquarters, a portrait of Stalin dominates the lobby. Beneath it hangs a quote: "Those who are not with us are against us." It's hard not to notice how seamlessly that mirrors Hitler's favorite phrasing. But you don't say that aloud, of course. Instead, you nod at the new slogans, sign the new membership card, and practice the new vocabulary. Genosse for comrade, Planerfüllung for meeting quotas, Parteilinie for the correct political stance. The German language, always precise, is now being retrofitted into a socialist toolkit. A quirky truth: the SED's early membership drives included dance parties and picnics, complete with accordion music and free beer. Nothing says building socialism like waltzing under a banner that reads, "Forwards into the bright future." You remember one of those afternoons vividly. A shy student asking you to dance while a Soviet officer tried to clap along, hopelessly offbeat. Even revolutions, it seems, need moments of accidental comedy. But as the months pass, the mask slips. Voluntary participation in the SED quickly becomes a necessity for any kind of career. Teachers, doctors, police officers, everyone learns to display enthusiasm like a badge. Refusal isn't punished openly, but it stains your record. And records here have long memories. One factory worker jokes, "Even my shadow needs party approval before following me home." The internal purges begin almost immediately. Those who question the Soviet model are labeled deviationists. Some vanish into the growing network of prisons and re-education centers. Others are demoted or publicly humiliated at party meetings. The line between politics and personal life dissolves. You find yourself wondering whether your neighbor's sudden promotion came from merit or from informing. It's not paranoia when everyone truly is listening. And still, amid the suspicion, people cling to small joys. On Sundays, families gather in parks for picnics made from ration scraps, potato salad without eggs, bread stretched with barley. Children chase each other among ruins, playing partisan and fascist, though the adults quietly prefer they didn't. You overhear a mother scolding her son, "Stop pretending to be the fascist." Someone might misunderstand, even play becomes political. The state press, newly nationalized, prints endless stories about Reconstruction. Articles praise hero workers who exceed production targets, model farmers who donate extra grain, young pioneers who plant trees for socialism. You can't help noticing how every photograph feels staged. Everyone smiling, everyone clean, everyone looking just left of the camera, as if waiting for approval. Historians will later call this the birth of the socialist aesthetic, but at the time it just feels slightly uncanny, like living in a permanent brochure. By 1948, SED General Secretary Walter Ulbricht emerges as the regime's face, a man with a bristly mustache, stiff manner, and the charisma of a tax audit. His famous phrase circulates among the people, "Es muss demokratisch aussehen, aber wir müssen alles in der Hand haben." It must look democratic, but we must have everything under control. You almost admire the honesty. It's the kind of cynicism that only a bureaucrat could make sound like philosophy. The church, once a quiet refuge, starts feeling the pressure too. Sermons are monitored. Priests are encouraged to support peace movements aligned with Soviet policy. A few resist, most adapt. The old hymns remain, but the tone is subdued. Fewer hallelujahs, more cautious amens. You notice that even faith is learning to whisper. Yet for all the control, the system still feels fragile. The black market thrives, Western goods slip through borders, and people continue listening to BBC or RIAS Berlin in secret. You huddle with friends around a radio, the volume barely audible, hearing voices from the free world discuss things your newspapers won't mention. Elections, jazz music, chewing gum. One evening you hear an American broadcast praising freedom in the West. You laugh quietly and say, "Freedom sounds expensive." Still, there's a strange pride among some citizens. "At least we're building something new," says a teacher you know. "Not just copying capitalism." And there's truth in that. The early years of the SED do carry a sense of mission. Rebuilding schools, providing healthcare, emphasizing women's work equality. Women enter factories and offices in unprecedented numbers. Creches and daycare centers open across cities. For many mothers, this is liberation, a chance to be more than caretakers. Historians still debate whether this was genuine feminism or economic necessity, but either way, it changes family life forever. Meanwhile, a quieter revolution unfolds in the countryside. Land reform, once hailed as justice, morphs into coercion. Large farms are broken into cooperatives. Smallholders are told to join collective enterprises for the good of the people. Some comply, others resist. You visit a cousin in Mecklenburg who mutters, "I fought for this land. Now I have to share it with the party." His fields look empty, not for lack of soil, but for lack of spirit. The new order creeps into every home through committees, quotas, and paperwork. Bureaucracy becomes a kind of national pastime. You need 3 stamps to get a bicycle, 5 to move apartments, 10 to buy a radio. The irony? Each form says simplifying the people's administration. You start collecting the official seals as if they were badges in a tragic scavenger hunt. Through all of this, your daily rhythm stabilizes. Work, ration line, meeting, repeat. It's dull, but survivable. The war's chaos has hardened into predictability. And predictability, you realize, can feel like peace. But beneath that fragile calm, something is fermenting. Discontent, fatigue, the whisper that maybe this unity isn't quite so united after all. And so, as 1949 approaches, the SED stands triumphant. Disciplined, centralized, loyal to Moscow. You don't yet know it, but the next step will make that loyalty permanent. The Soviet zone is about to become a nation of its own. A republic on paper, a satellite in reality. And you, an ordinary citizen just trying to keep your ration book dry, will soon wake up with a new passport you never asked for. October 7th, 1949. You wake to the sound of fireworks echoing over the gray roofs of Berlin, though they feel more like thunder than celebration. The streets are lined with banners, bearing the fresh insignia of a new country, Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the German Democratic Republic, the GDR. The words feel weighty, as if someone tried to wrap an entire ideology into a tidy acronym. A brass band blares Auferstanden aus Ruinen, Risen from the Ruins, the new national anthem. The melody is solemn, almost mournful, as if even the song itself knows what a contradiction this moment really is. You stand among the crowd in the square, flags fluttering in the wind. Children wave small red banners. Party officials beam from the podium. The announcer's voice crackles through loudspeakers. The working people of Germany have risen to build their own state. You try to believe it, but you also know this isn't a spontaneous birth. It's a carefully staged production. Behind the curtains, the Soviet advisors nod approvingly. Every word, every slogan, every camera angle has been approved in advance. The GDR is independent only in the same way a puppet dances independently from its strings. Still, you can't deny the symbolism. After years of division and occupation, there's something comforting about having a government that at least speaks German again, even if it whispers with a Russian accent. Walter Ulbricht stands at the podium, small, square-framed glasses glinting, mustache trimmed to bureaucratic perfection, and proclaims, "Socialism and peace will guide our future." The crowd erupts into applause, though you notice how rehearsed it sounds. Somewhere in the distance, someone mutters, "Peace, yes, but whose?" Historians still argue whether Ulbricht believed his own words. Was he a sincere socialist, or merely Stalin's most obedient clerk? You can never tell. What you can tell is that from this moment on, your life becomes a study in doublespeak. Freedom means conformity. Democracy means a single ballot with one party. Independence means asking Moscow before breathing. The new government begins to reorganize everything from the top down. Ministries multiply like mushrooms. Ministry of Light Industry, Heavy Industry, Transport, Propaganda, Information. Each one publishes pamphlets printed on thin gray paper explaining how the GDR will outpace capitalism within a decade. It's ambitious, even inspiring, if you ignore the smell of printer's ink and irony. You go to the town hall to exchange your old occupation papers for the new Personalausweis, the official identity card of the GDR. The clerk, a thin man with a party pin, stamps your form with almost religious zeal. You now belong, officially, to a socialist republic. The paper feels heavy in your pocket, not because of its weight, but because it tells you exactly who you are allowed to be. Daily life begins to change in subtle, insidious ways. The government introduces people's courts, where class enemies can be tried publicly. You attend one out of morbid curiosity. A small factory foreman accused of hoarding materials. The judge calls him a saboteur. The crowd boos on cue. He's sentenced to years of hard labor. Everyone claps, though most look at the floor. When you leave, you realize the purpose of such trials isn't justice. It's theater, a warning to anyone tempted to think independently. And yet, oddly enough, there's also genuine reconstruction underway. Streets are cleared, trams repaired, apartment blocks rebuilt brick by brick. There's a sense of collective effort, or at least collective exhaustion. You join a voluntary Sunday work brigade to rebuild a school. The party newspaper photographs you holding a shovel, smiling. Later, the picture appears under the headline, "Workers joyfully support the socialist future." You almost choke on your soup laughing, mostly because you don't remember smiling. Amid the gray uniformity, some quirky details persist. Cigarette packs feature portraits of Lenin. Public fountains play the Internationale. Even toothpaste brands are renamed to sound revolutionary. Rotor Stern, Red Star Mint. You can't tell if it's patriotism or parody anymore. Then there's the radio. The GDR launches its own station, Radio Berlin International, broadcasting truth to the world. The announcers speak with warm, careful tones, warning listeners about Western decadence. Ironically, half the people in your neighborhood use the same radios to listen to West Germany's RIAS Berlin instead. Late at night, the air becomes a battleground of frequencies. Socialism on the left, capitalism on the right, both literally and politically. Life, however, is still hard. The post-war rationing hasn't ended. You queue for hours to buy half a loaf of bread and 2 turnips. Butter is rarer than gold. You sometimes dream of the pre-war days, not because they were better, but because they were simpler, when hunger wasn't ideological. The party insists that shortages are temporary, the result of imperialist sabotage. You privately suspect it's just bad planning. Meanwhile, the border between East and West becomes more defined. The Soviets shut down easy crossings, and new checkpoints spring up. Families begin to divide. Brothers in Leipzig, sisters in Frankfurt, parents in Dresden, children in Munich. The trains still run, but each ticket now requires a reason and permission. You feel the invisible line tightening across the country, like a zipper slowly closing. Still, the GDR pushes its image of progress. Propaganda posters show smiling farmers driving tractors, slogans declaring, "Plan over fulfilled. Our grain feeds peace." In reality, the tractors often break down, and the grain rots in warehouses due to bureaucratic confusion. But pointing that out is pessimism, a thought crime of sorts. You learn to phrase complaints creatively. When your friend jokes that the 5-year plan takes 10 years, you both laugh nervously, then look over your shoulders. Yet, not everything feels grim. There's pride in reconstruction, in rebuilding cities like Dresden from ashes. Cultural life resumes, though carefully managed. Theaters reopen with socialist plays. Orchestras perform Beethoven alongside songs of the worker. The GDR's film studio, DEFA, begins producing movies, heroic workers, noble farmers, scheming Western spies. They're melodramatic, but oddly comforting. After all, even in fiction, someone finally seems to have a plan. One cold evening, you attend a film premiere in a small cinema smelling of coal dust and wet coats. The newsreel before the movie shows Stalin visiting Moscow factories, smiling benevolently. The narrator calls him the greatest friend of the German people. The audience claps dutifully. You can't help but think, it's strange how easily applause can replace truth. Then, in 1950, the GDR joins Comecon, the Soviet-led economic alliance. The West has the Marshall Plan. The East now has Moscow's planned economy. You notice the shift immediately. Quotas rise, new state-owned enterprises appear, and foreign experts from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the USSR arrive to advise local managers. Some are earnest, others arrogant. You get used to hearing phrases like, "in the Soviet model," appended to every sentence. Still, for all its flaws, the system offers stability. Jobs for nearly everyone, cheap housing, even if it leaks, education for your children. It's easy to see why many people simply accept it. After the chaos of war, even managed order feels like peace. One historian would later call it the dictatorship of normality. You call it Tuesday, but beneath the surface, discontent simmers. You can feel it in the tired eyes of factory workers, the muttered complaints in breadlines, the silent glances exchanged during party meetings. People want to believe in the promise of socialism. They really do. But faith fades quickly when the shelves stay empty. The slogans sound louder each year, as if the government thinks volume can replace prosperity. By the early 1950s, a new phrase enters daily speech: Der Westen hat's besser. The West has it better. You start hearing about the miracles of the economic wonder in the Federal Republic: shiny cars, full stores, jazz on the radio. Some dismiss it as capitalist propaganda. Others start wondering whether paradise might actually be just a train ride away. And so the GDR, barely born, already feels haunted by the ghost of a richer twin living just beyond its borders. You can't yet see the future wall that will one day slice through Berlin, but in 1949, you can already feel its foundations, not in stone, but in silence. You wake to the sound of the factory whistle, thin, distant, and somehow apologetic. The shift begins before sunrise, and even the dawn feels rationed. In the workers' dormitory, boots scrape against the cold concrete floor as men and women shuffle toward another day of quotas and slogans. The walls are plastered with posters promising abundance through socialist industry, but the cupboards remain as bare as your paycheck. The war is over, the republic has been founded, and yet life in the GDR still feels like standing in a long queue for a train that may never arrive. The first 5 years after 1949 are an experiment in central planning. On paper, it's elegant. The Zentrale Planungskommission in Berlin calculates exactly how much steel, bread, and soap the people will need, how many tractors must be built, how many socks must be knitted. In reality, the numbers come from dreams rather than fields. You watch managers frown over charts, factories run short of parts, and warehouses fill with useless goods. Historians still debate whether the GDR's early shortages were caused by Soviet reparations, by incompetence, or by the impossible nature of planning human appetite. To you, it just feels like standing in another line for potatoes. The irony is that Germany's industrial heart, the Ruhr, lies far to the west, inside the capitalist miracle now blooming under the Marshall Plan. Over there, the shelves are filling, wages rising, optimism spilling like champagne. Over here, the economy limps on scavenged machines and ideological enthusiasm. You can almost hear the difference when you tune the radio. West German stations hum with jingles and ads for shiny new products, while East German ones drone on about collective achievements and exemplary comrades. Your breakfast ration is a gray slice of bread, 1 spoon of margarine, and a watery chicory coffee substitute politely called muckafuck. The name makes you smirk every morning. At least the revolution still allows one private joke. You take your tin cup and step outside. The air smells of coal smoke and winter. At the factory, the foreman reads out production targets. "We must meet 110% of plan," he says with an expression that implies divine necessity. Someone mutters, "How do you exceed perfection?" The foreman doesn't answer. The question isn't theoretical, it's criminal. The loudspeakers blare cheerful anthems while machines cough and wheeze. A banner overhead proclaims, "The worker's hand shapes the socialist dawn." You wipe oil from your fingers and think that dawn could use a mechanic. In the canteen, the conversation is always cautious. You never know who might repeat your words. The Stasi hasn't yet reached its full power, but informers are already a fact of life, a whispering fog that seeps through every room. A friend of yours disappears after joking that the only thing the plan produces is paperwork. You never see him again. Still, not everything is bleak. There's a curious dignity in endurance. People decorate their small apartments with flowers, paint murals over cracked plaster, and hold dance evenings after shifts. A violinist from your block performs Schubert in the evenings, his bow patched with wire. Someone brews illegal schnapps from beets. You laugh, you sing, you forget for an hour that soap is rationed and fruit a rumor. Survival becomes art. The party, however, never sleeps. Its committees measure progress not in comfort, but in ideology. Each factory now has a political officer, usually a man with stern eyebrows and a notebook. His job is to ensure that the workers are ideologically pure and sufficiently grateful. During lunch breaks, he reads speeches about the successes of Soviet agriculture, as if stories of Ukrainian wheat will make your soup thicker. A strange contest begins between reality and rhetoric. Every failure must be reinterpreted as progress. If the bread is stale, it's because the people are too modest to demand luxury. If the lights go out, it's because electricity serves higher goals. And when the winter of 1950 brings yet another coal shortage, the newspapers call it a test of socialist endurance. You pass the test by shivering in your coat. Still, the state tries to care. Subsidized housing projects rise like gray fortresses, rows of concrete rectangles nicknamed Plattenbau. They promise modern living, central heating, shared playgrounds, walls so thin you can hear your neighbor sneeze. When you move into one, it feels like a victory, until you realize the elevator doesn't work and the heating turns on only when the party has surplus coal. You laugh again, softly. Food remains the most constant topic. You spend hours in line at the Konsum store, staring at shelves of canned cabbage and salt herring. Bananas are mythical. Oranges appear at Christmas, guarded like treasure. One winter, your neighbor trades a wedding ring for a bag of coffee beans smuggled from the West. Historians later call it the scarcity culture. You just call it normal life. A quirky but true anecdote circulates through the city. A man queues so long for an unknown product that when he finally reaches the counter, he buys it without asking what it is. Later, he discovers it's dog food. "No problem," he says, "I'll get a dog." It becomes everyone's favorite joke and quiet metaphor. Yet for all the shortages, the government insists that East Germany is advancing faster than its capitalist rival. Charts in newspapers show graphs climbing heroically upward, even as real wages fall. You realize that socialism's greatest achievement so far is its optimism. And optimism, like coffee, is always in short supply. At the same time, propaganda celebrates new heroes, the Arbeiterhelden, worker heroes who allegedly triple their quotas through sheer socialist enthusiasm. The most famous is Adolf Hennecke, a miner from the Erzgebirge who supposedly produced 387% of his target in one shift. His story is printed on posters, school books, postage stamps. Children are told to be like Hennecke. You whisper to a friend, if everyone works at 387%, who fixes the mistakes? The friend doesn't answer. Maybe he doesn't think it's funny. The party also introduces cultural reforms. Art must serve the people. Literature must glorify labor. Painters who once experimented with surrealism now paint smiling farmers. Writers who hesitate are called formalists and sent to study Marxist theory until their metaphors behave. It's a creative desert, but even deserts grow strange flowers. Underground poets gather in basements to read verses about gray mornings and silent fields. Everyone knows what those metaphors mean. Religion struggles too. Churches are allowed but distrusted. Sermons are monitored. Congregations labeled reactionary. Still, on Sunday mornings, bells ring stubbornly through the fog. You attend once in a while, not out of faith, but out of nostalgia, for something unregulated, something unscheduled. The pastor speaks softly about forgiveness, though you sense he means courage. Meanwhile, the western border glows faintly with possibility. Letters from relatives in the Federal Republic smell faintly of coffee and freedom. They write about new televisions, full shops, colorful streets. You show the letter to your neighbor. He reads it twice, then folds it carefully, like contraband. He mutters, "Maybe they won the wrong war." Historians still argue whether these early years were necessary growing pains or the seeds of inevitable failure. The party insists they were a heroic beginning. Critics say they were the birth of disillusionment. You, standing in your unheated kitchen stirring cabbage soup, suspect both are true. The GDR is a strange parent, strict, humorless, yet convinced it loves you. By 1951, a new mood settles over the country: fatigue. People stop expecting abundance. They just want consistency. The government senses it too and launches moral campaigns to rekindle enthusiasm. Workers are urged to volunteer extra hours. Students join brigades planting trees and painting slogans on walls. You sign up once, mostly for the free lunch. After 8 hours painting "Work Builds Peace," you realize irony might be the GDR's only renewable resource. At night, you lie awake, listening to the creak of pipes in your apartment. Somewhere outside, a loudspeaker recites the news. Production goals exceeded. The people triumph again. You close your eyes and imagine you're somewhere else. A quiet farm, a sunny square, maybe even across that invisible border. But you stay. Everyone stays. Because despite the shortages, this is home. And hope is hard to smuggle. And as the new decade dawns, the regime prepares something even bigger. The party's economists speak of a grand 5-year plan, a bold leap toward prosperity. Ulbricht appears on posters promising steel and bread for all. The future, once again, is only 5 years away, if you can just survive the present. You wake before dawn, rubbing your eyes, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coal and cold iron. The calendar says it's 1952. But it might as well still be 1948. Everything looks the same. The streets are gray. The walls are gray. Even the sky seems to have taken sides with the color gray. Yet there's a new sound beneath the monotony. Speeches, horns, parades. The party has declared a 5-year plan, a grand experiment that will supposedly drag the GDR into prosperity and prove that socialism can outbuild capitalism. You glance at the newspaper headline, "Steel, bread, and peace for all." You sigh. You'd settle for butter. The plan is the brainchild of Walter Ulbricht and his circle of Soviet-trained economists. They promise industrial miracles, factories doubling output, farms feeding the nation, a new socialist man forged through hard work and faith in the plan. You, however, have learned that every slogan comes with a ration card. Historians still argue whether the plan was meant to uplift the East or impress Moscow. But to those living it, it feels like being drafted into a crusade made of paperwork. At the factory gates, a banner proclaims, "Forward to the 5-year plan." Your shift foreman hands out new quotas printed in red ink. They aren't just higher, they're absurd. You run the numbers in your head. Even if every machine ran 24 hours a day, you couldn't hit the target. But questioning arithmetic has become a political offense. You nod, say "Jawohl, Genosse," and tighten the bolt on a half-working lathe. Agriculture is next in line for transformation. In the countryside, small farms are being absorbed into collective cooperatives. Voluntary, the party insists. You visit your cousin Hans, a farmer near Wittenberg. He looks 10 years older. His fields are now shared with 5 families and 1 state inspector who doesn't know the difference between wheat and rye. "They say we'll get tractors," Hans mutters. "But so far we've only got meetings." A week later, he's fined for hoarding grain. He keeps a single sack hidden under the floorboards, like contraband gold. The propaganda machine spins faster than ever. Posters show smiling workers holding hammers beside red stars. The radio broadcasts stories of model collectives achieving miracles, factories that exceed quotas by 300%, villages that double harvests. You know some of those places. You've seen the empty shelves yourself. It's theater, but a convincing one. People clap not because they believe, but because they must. By summer 1952, Ulbricht announces a decisive turn towards socialism. That phrase, der beschleunigte Aufbau des Sozialismus, becomes the year's catch-all mantra. In practice, it means tightening everything. Higher taxes on the middle class, restrictions on travel, and new surveillance offices springing up like weeds. The border with West Germany, once a dotted line on a map, starts to harden into barbed wire. Entire families disappear overnight, packing what they can and fleeing west before the gates close completely. You think about leaving too sometimes. The temptation grows each time you see photos of West Berlin's glittering shop windows. But your parents are old, your friends are here, and besides, you still cling to the hope that maybe the system will fix itself. Hope, after all, is the cheapest currency. At work, the atmosphere turns anxious. Inspectors roam the floor with clipboards, checking not just output, but enthusiasm. Frown too much, and you're ideologically unstable. A poster of Stalin hangs above the clock. His eyes seem to follow every movement. The rumor mill churns. So-and-so was denounced for complaining about bread prices. Someone else caught listening to jazz. A student expelled for drawing caricatures. You start to speak in half sentences, learning the fine art of saying nothing. One afternoon, a party official visits the factory. He shakes hands, praises the workers, then points to a chart showing production rising steadily. You glance at the chart, an elegant diagonal line, and realize it's printed on the same paper every month. The numbers never change. Only the date does. When he leaves, someone mutters, "Our graphs are doing fine. Shame about the machines." Everyone laughs, a little too loudly. Meanwhile, shortages deepen. Meat is rare, milk thin, soap diluted. Queues stretch down streets like human barcodes. You wait 3 hours for a pair of shoes, only to find they're 2 sizes too small. "Comrade," the clerk says, "tight shoes build character." You almost believe her. Children grow up reciting the slogans by heart. Schools teach them that the West is greedy, that capitalism starves the poor, that the GDR is the moral compass of the world. They wear red scarves and march in the Junge Pionier parades, singing cheerful songs about unity. Watching them, you feel torn, part pride, part unease. They look so confident, so certain. You envy them that certainty. By winter, discontent is impossible to hide. Workers grumble about impossible quotas. Farmers complain about forced collectivization. Letters from the West describe abundance, new apartments, fresh fruit, movies. Even in secret, people start comparing. "They have bananas," someone whispers. Bananas become myth, metaphor, and forbidden dream all at once. Still, Ulbricht pushes forward. In speeches, he insists that temporary hardship is proof of future success. "We are building socialism in the face of imperialist pressure," he says, voice cracking over the radio. You wonder whether he actually eats the same rations as you do. Historians still debate how delusional the leadership truly was, whether they believed their own propaganda or simply hoped repetition would make it real. Then comes spring, 1953. You're exhausted, thinner, and a little angrier than before. The newspapers celebrate record output while the lines for bread stretch longer than ever. The word strike is forbidden, yet it slips from lips like a prayer. Somewhere deep inside, you feel it, the air changing, tension coiling like wire. The plan that promised abundance has delivered only exhaustion. and something has to give. A quirky anecdote circulates in Berlin. A worker writes to the party asking for clarification. If we achieve all the goals of the 5-year plan in 3 years, can we take the remaining 2 off? No one laughs publicly, but privately the joke spreads like wildfire. Humor, it turns out, is the last legal protest. As summer approaches, rumors spread of unrest. Minor walkouts, protests in factories, murmured defiance. The leadership dismisses it as bourgeois agitation, but you can feel it in the streets, like pressure before a storm. The faces in queues look sharper, the conversations shorter. Even the slogans on the walls seem to fade faster, as if the paint itself is losing faith. And so the stage is set, though you don't know it yet. The 5-year plan has achieved one thing. It has united the workers, not in triumph, but in quiet fury. In a few weeks, that fury will burst from workshops and barracks into the open, shaking the foundations of the regime. For now, you finish your shift, wipe your hands on a rag, and look toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, thunder is building. You wake to the sound of murmurs spreading down the factory floor. Hushed, nervous, electric. It's June 1953, and something is stirring. The air feels heavier, as if charged with static. You can sense it even before the siren fails to sound. Workers stand in clusters, not at their machines, but in tight circles, whispering. "The quotas again," someone mutters. "They've raised them again." The new directives have just arrived from Berlin. Production targets increased by 10% across all sectors. Wages frozen, prices rising. It's madness. Everyone knows it. The 5-year plan is collapsing under its own ambition, and now the party wants the people to fix the math. You see it in every exhausted face, the calculation between fear and hunger. For years, people have complained in private. Today, for the first time, they do it out loud. It begins in a single construction site on Stalin Alley, East Berlin's Grand Socialist Boulevard. The irony is delicious. The street, named for Stalin himself, becomes the birthplace of open defiance. The workers there have had enough. They drop their tools, tear down the red banners that promise victory through labor, and start marching. You're not there yet. You only hear about it through a friend who bursts into the canteen, breathless, eyes wide. They're walking, hundreds of them. By noon, the marchers number in the thousands. Bricklayers, transport workers, machinists, all heading toward the House of Ministries, chanting something the loudspeakers never play. Wir fordern freie Wahlen. We demand free elections. The words are dangerous, heretical. You feel your stomach twist hearing them, half terrified, half thrilled. Historians still argue whether this was truly spontaneous or quietly encouraged by Western radio. But at that moment, it feels pure, born from exhaustion, not espionage. The next morning, the contagion spreads. From Leipzig to Magdeburg, Halle to Dresden, workers strike, offices close, students pour into the streets. By midday, the crowds reach 300,000, ordinary people marching past slogans they once painted themselves. You join them, swept along by the tide. The sun is high. The air smells of coal dust and adrenaline. Banners read, "Down with the quotas," and "We are the people." Someone carries a homemade sign, "Bread, freedom, justice." It's simple, almost poetic. For a few fleeting hours, Berlin feels free. No speeches, no orchestrated applause, just human noise, raw and unfiltered. Men climb lampposts, waving the old black, red, gold flag. Women sing in cracked voices. The slogans echo through boulevards once flattened by war. We want unity. We want truth. You can barely believe it's real. But freedom, like coffee and bananas, is rare in the GDR. Around midday, the trucks arrive, Soviet ones, olive green, rolling in with deliberate slowness. The crowd falls silent. You see soldiers perched on turrets, helmets glinting. Then, the unmistakable clank of tank treads on cobblestone. Someone near you whispers, "They wouldn't dare." You wish he were right. The first warning shot cracks through the square like a whip. The crowd scatters. Screams replace chants. Smoke drifts upward from burning leaflets. You run, not because you're brave or cowardly, but because there's nowhere else to go. When you look back, you see the red flag flying again over the ministry building, fluttering in the smoke. The uprising is over before sunset. Historians still debate the death toll. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The official reports call them counter-revolutionaries. The Western press calls them freedom fighters. You call them your neighbors. That night, you hear the rumble of tanks echo long after they've left the square. Curfews are declared, party patrols roam the streets. Loudspeakers blare official announcements. Order has been restored. The working class has triumphed over provocateurs. You stare out your window, watching smoke rise over Stalin Alley, and think, if this is triumph, what does defeat look like? In the following days, fear returns like an old friend. The Stasi works overtime. Interrogations fill cellars. Denunciations fill newspapers. Factories reopen under heavy surveillance. At your plant, the foreman reads from a statement. The party recognizes that honest workers were misled by agents of imperialism. Everyone nods solemnly. Though the lie is transparent, no one dares contradict it. A quirky fact emerges later. When Soviet soldiers refused to fire on civilians in one Berlin district, they were quietly replaced with units from Siberia who spoke no German. Easier to shoot strangers when you can't understand them. It's the kind of cold logic only empire can perfect. Yet repression can't erase what happened. The uprising plants something deeper, a stubborn memory that won't die. Even in whispered conversations, people refer to June 17th as der Tag der Wahrheit, the day of truth. For the rest of your life, you'll remember where you were when you first heard those chants, how your heart pounded, how briefly it all felt possible. After the crackdown, Ulbricht's regime doubles down. Moscow, shaken but determined, keeps him in power. Stalin is dead now, replaced by Khrushchev, who preaches peaceful coexistence, but the tanks in Berlin still smell like war. The GDR leadership promises reform, less coercion, more efficiency. Instead, they create new departments, new slogans, and a new secret police directorate. Bureaucracy reproduces faster than optimism. For a while, though, there's a strange calm. The party distributes wage bonuses, loosens quotas, even lowers some prices. It's not kindness, it's anesthesia. People are tired. They take the bribes and keep quiet. But you can sense it. The relationship between ruler and ruled has cracked. You can plaster it over with red paint, but the fissure remains. Life resumes its gray rhythm. You return to the factory. The machines hum, the foremen shout, the radio praises socialist unity. The only difference is the silence, a heavier kind, the silence of people who have seen the edge and stepped back. Still, even in repression, absurdity thrives. The government renames streets again. Stalin Alley briefly becomes Karl Marx Alley, as if changing signs could erase memory. The old name remains in people's mouths, stubborn as rust. In cafes, whispers circulate that Ulbricht's mustache looks smaller since the uprising, perhaps trimmed by fear. It's a joke, but also a small act of resistance. Humor survives where protest cannot. In your mailbox arrives a pamphlet titled, "Learn from the Errors, Strengthen the Republic." You read it, chuckle, and throw it away. The errors are never theirs, only yours. Yet beneath the fear, life insists on living. People marry, children are born, music returns. You attend a concert in Leipzig where a young pianist plays Bach with ferocious beauty. When he finishes, the audience erupts into applause. Long, uncoordinated, real. For a moment, it feels like that same spirit from June, spontaneous, uncontrolled. You realize that freedom, at least the small kind, can still exist between two notes of music. The following winter, the government declares June 17th a day of national unity. The irony is staggering. They turn the anniversary of rebellion into an official holiday. Parades, speeches, and compulsory attendance. You stand in the crowd again, watching soldiers march where workers once did. The announcer shouts, "The people and the party are one." You smile bitterly. The people clap because they must. The party claps because it can. Historians later call the uprising a turning point, not because it changed the regime, but because it revealed its weakness. The GDR survived, yes, but only by tightening its grip. And you, along with millions of others, learned an unspoken rule. The wall may not yet exist, but it already lives inside you. As 1954 dawns, the rubble of revolt has been swept away. But every whisper, every side glance, every careful sentence now carries an echo of that day when people forgot to be afraid. You still pass by Stalin Alley sometimes and see the bullet scars hidden under fresh plaster. You know what's underneath, and so do the masons who built over it. The government can rewrite history books, but not concrete. Concrete remembers everything. You wake to quiet. No shouts, no tanks, no banners, just the dull hum of the city trying to remember what normal feels like. It's 1954, a year after the uprising, and East Germany wears its calm like a bandage. Streets are cleaner, factories running again, but the silence beneath it all feels surgical. You can still sense the missing people, the ones taken for questioning, the ones who fled west, the ones who stopped laughing. The SED has learned its lesson. You can't starve people into loyalty, so the regime begins its campaign of stability. Prices drop a little, work quotas ease, and a new phrase enters the lexicon: sozialistische Menschlichkeit, socialist humanity. It sounds gentle, even warm, but you soon realize it means be kind to the party so it doesn't notice you. Obrecht appears on posters again, this time smiling, an attempt at fatherly benevolence. The propaganda paints him as the wise builder of peace, though you suspect the smile is more from relief than conviction. Behind the facade, Moscow has reined him in. Stalin's death has shifted everything. Khrushchev's new doctrine, peaceful coexistence, trickles down like diluted honey. It promises a softer socialism, but with the same iron aftertaste. Factories reopen under new management committees, democratically elected by workers who receive ballots with only one name. You're rehired under the same quota system, though now the reports use gentler words. Efficiency drive replaces production order. Voluntary overtime replaces mandatory shift extension. Bureaucracy has learned to smile while tightening the screws. The West, meanwhile, glitters brighter every year. West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, fills newspapers with envy. Glossy photos show shiny cars, neon signs, families at seaside holidays. Your cousin from Hamburg writes that they have a new television and asks what things are like over there. You read his letter twice, fold it neatly, and hide it in a drawer. Some questions are best left unanswered. Still, there's a fragile sense of improvement. Food rations shrink, but don't vanish. Coffee, real coffee, appears occasionally in the stores. You line up for 2 hours to buy half a kilo and treat it like treasure. The taste is bitter, but the smell alone feels like victory. Children receive new textbooks. Schools get rebuilt with bright red flags fluttering out front. The slogans are omnipresent, but less aggressive now. Study well, build peace. Work hard, live better. You'd prefer eat first. In cities like Dresden and Leipzig, reconstruction takes on monumental ambition. Architects design wide boulevards flanked by grand apartment blocks, palaces for the workers. They're modeled after Soviet neoclassicism, tall columns, mosaics, and slogans carved into the stone. They look impressive, but inside, the plumbing groans like it's sighing in protest. You move into one in 1955, grateful for the space even if the walls are paper thin. You can hear your neighbors sneezing through the night, and probably vice versa. Privacy, like coffee, remains rationed. A quirky fact from this era? The GDR introduces a new line of products labeled VEB, Volkseigener Betrieb, or People's-Owned Enterprise. It sounds empowering, but most of them produce either too much of what no one wants or too little of what everyone needs. You once saw a factory warehouse stacked with thousands of identical teapots, all missing lids. The next day's newspaper praised record ceramic output, yet somehow, life continues. The party shifts its propaganda tone from triumph to domesticity. Posters now show cheerful families around dinner tables, children reading, mothers smiling beside washing machines. You suspect the washing machines don't actually work, but the fantasy is pleasant. Even the weekly paper Neues Deutschland adds cooking columns, urging citizens to try creative uses of cabbage. There aren't many. Still, there's an undeniable thaw. People start going out again, to theaters, to concerts, to dance halls that once felt forbidden. You attend one, a smoky bar where a small jazz trio plays covers of American tunes under the coded label Modern Rhythm Music. The saxophonist winks at the audience before sliding in to Take the A Train. Everyone claps. Everyone pretends it's about Moscow's metro. Historians still debate how much cultural freedom Ulbricht allowed during this period. Some say it was deliberate, a pressure valve to keep people compliant. Others claim it was just incompetence. Either way, the GDR of the mid-1950s feels almost livable. If you avoid politics, keep your head down, and laugh quietly, you can carve out a small, private happiness. But cracks remain. The border, once porous, is tightening. Travel to the West now requires permission letters, background checks, and the right socialist character. You apply once just to test the system. 3 months later, a polite rejection arrives. Your presence in the Republic is indispensable. You pin it to your kitchen wall as a reminder that indispensability feels a lot like imprisonment. Then there's the Abteilung Staatssicherheit, the State Security Department, or Stasi. It's small still, but growing like mold in the corners of the Republic. Officially, it protects the achievements of socialism. Unofficially, it protects the regime from its own citizens. A colleague warns you never to joke about the party within earshot of a stranger. You take his advice to heart. The walls don't talk yet, but they're learning. In 1956, Khrushchev denounces Stalin's crimes in his secret speech, and shockwaves ripple through every communist country. In Hungary, protests erupt into revolution. Soviet tanks roll again. You listen to the news, heart pounding, remembering June 1953. For a few days, it feels like history might repeat or maybe correct itself. But in Budapest, the streets fill with blood, and by November, the revolution is crushed. The GDR tightens overnight. Ulbricht declares, "Counter-revolution will never pass our borders." You believe him. Still, change sneaks in through the cracks. Western radio stations beam rock and roll across the airwaves. Young people, born after the war, dance to Elvis and Bill Haley. You see them on corners in tight jeans, hair slicked back, trying to look like James Dean with ration cards. The party calls them halbstark, half-strongs, half-heroes, half-delinquents. They call themselves free. Their rebellion isn't political, it's musical. But in a country obsessed with obedience, rhythm itself becomes sedition. By 1957, another migration wave begins. Teachers, engineers, doctors, quietly leaving through Berlin's still open border. It's easy. The city remains split into 4 zones, and you can simply step from east to west at the right crossing. You've thought about it. Everyone has. But leaving feels like tearing a photograph, irreversible. Besides, you still believe there's something worth staying for, even if you can't name it. One night, after another long shift, you sit on your balcony and watch the lights of West Berlin glowing faintly on the horizon. The border runs invisible just beyond those rooftops, one street away, one decision away. You wonder if the people over there ever think about you. Probably not. Freedom, like hunger, makes people self-centered, and so you stay, watching the republic drift into its peculiar rhythm. Neither tyranny nor freedom, neither despair nor joy, just the steady hum of survival. You learn to appreciate small victories, a working radio, an orange at Christmas, a friend's quiet joke that makes you laugh despite yourself. Historians call this the GDR's period of consolidation. You call it getting used to being watched. By the decade's end, East Germany feels stable, predictable, even dull. But that dullness hides the country's biggest contradiction yet. While the party celebrates its success, nearly 1 million people have already left. The future looks suspiciously like an emptying room. You don't know it yet, but this slow exodus, this quiet rebellion by departure, will soon force the regime's most desperate act of all. The wall isn't here yet, but you can feel it forming. Not in brick, not in barbed wire, but in policy meetings, in migration reports, in the sleepless eyes of party officials. It's still invisible, but like every great monument in history, it begins as an idea. And this one is being built out of fear. You wake to a city that feels like a crossroads. It's the late 1950s now, and Berlin is the strangest place on earth. One city, two worlds, stitched together by trolley lines and bad coffee. The border still runs invisibly through streets and gardens, through tram stops and cafes. You can walk across it without a passport, step from drab shop windows into bright neon signs. For East Berliners, it's both a miracle and a temptation. For the regime, it's a hemorrhage. You start to notice the disappearances again. A colleague in the factory doesn't show up one morning. His locker is cleared by noon. No one says a word, but everyone knows. He's gone west. The newspapers call it Republikflucht, the flight from the Republic. The phrase makes it sound like betrayal, but you know better. It's escape. By 1959, nearly 200,000 East Germans have crossed the border. Engineers, teachers, doctors, and yes, a few ordinary dreamers who just got tired of being watched. Historians will later call it the brain drain. But living through it feels more like bleeding out. Every week someone else leaves. A neighbor, a cousin, your dentist. Whole apartment blocks seem to empty. In coffee lines, people lower their voices. Did you hear? The Mullers are gone. How? Night train to Friedrichstrasse. Walked right through. You nod, pretending to be shocked, but part of you admires them. The party papers insist the exodus is a Western plot, that agents lure honest citizens away with lies about abundance. Yet the proof is in plain sight. West Berlin glows like a billboard of everything you're missing. Television sets, bananas, jazz records, laughter that doesn't sound rationed. You can almost smell freedom drifting in from the other side. Part diesel, part perfume, entirely forbidden. Still, you stay. Partly out of duty, partly inertia, and partly because leaving would mean abandoning your parents and your memories. Besides, you tell yourself, maybe things will improve. Ulbricht talks endlessly about modernization, about a new plan that will close the economic gap. He calls it catching up and overtaking. You want to believe it. After all, you're tired of running on empty. In 1960, the government accelerates collectivization. Private farmers, those few who resisted joining cooperatives, are targeted. Inspectors arrive in black cars, bringing invitations to compliance meetings. Your cousin Hans, the same one who once hid a sack of grain under his floorboards, gives in at last. Better to lose the farm than the family, he says quietly. The party celebrates the completion of socialism in agriculture. The villages celebrate with vodka because tears are too obvious. In cities, shortages deepen. Butter vanishes for months. Meat becomes a rumor. You start adding grated carrots to bread dough to stretch the flour. The state launches a new campaign. Eat local, think global, build socialism. You'd laugh if your stomach weren't growling. Meanwhile, the Stasi matures into its monstrous adolescence. The ministry moves into its new headquarters on Normannenstrasse, a vast gray labyrinth of offices, typewriters, and locked drawers. Their motto is chillingly precise: to know everything about everyone. You feel it everywhere. The glance that lingers too long. The sudden pause in conversation when someone enters the room. Friends start speaking in coded phrases. It's raining might mean don't talk here. We should meet later might mean check if the walls have ears. One evening, your friend Ernst invites you for dinner. You arrive to find his wife pale, his son silent. He leans close and whispers, "They came last night." "Just questions," they said. "About the neighbor." He forces a smile. "Funny thing, I didn't realize how much I'd forgotten until they reminded me." You laugh weakly, knowing that's the safest response. The numbers keep climbing. By 1961, nearly 4 million people have left since 1949. A quarter of the entire population. It's not just workers, it's the future walking out the door. Teachers, surgeons, scientists, even state officials quietly vanish through West Berlin. The government grows frantic. At meetings, Albrecht bangs his fist on the table. No one has any intention of building a wall, he declares to foreign journalists that June. The line will become infamous. Even then, you can hear the lie humming underneath. The pressure builds through the summer. Soviet leader Khrushchev demands the West recognize East Berlin as the GDR's capital. The Americans refuse. Tensions boil in Vienna when Kennedy and Khrushchev meet. One young, one old. Both stubborn. You listen to the news crackling over your radio and feel the world tightening like a vice around your small city. Everyone knows something is coming. No one knows what. Then, on the night of August 12, 1961, the quiet breaks. Trucks rumble down the streets. Soldiers spill out with rolls of barbed wire, and floodlights bloom like artificial moons. You wake to the clatter of hammers and the low hum of generators. When you step outside, the air tastes metallic. Across the street, a soldier unrolls fencing in front of an old tram line, one that used to cross freely into the western sector. By morning, the city is sliced in half. Roads are sealed, train lines cut, families divided overnight. You stand among hundreds of stunned onlookers watching men in uniform dig trenches through the pavement. Some shout, others weep. A few simply stare. A woman across the street screams her husband's name, trapped now on the other side. He shouts back, his voice lost under the clank of shovels. You realize they're building the impossible, a wall not against enemies, but against their own people. Historians will later describe that night as Operation Rose, executed with military precision. Over 30,000 soldiers, 500 trucks, 80 miles of barbed wire. By the time the sun rises, Berlin has become the world's most fortified prison. At first, the barrier looks temporary, wire and wooden posts. But within weeks, concrete replaces it. Watchtowers sprout along the length, manned by armed guards with orders to shoot. You pass one and feel the crosshairs you can't see. A friend mutters, they call it the anti-fascist protection wall. I call it the anti-freedom protection wall. You laugh softly, then hush him. Families are torn apart. A father on the western side tosses food parcels over the barrier to his children. A nurse climbs out a hospital window to reunite with her fiancé. Others aren't so lucky. One young man, Gunther Litvin, tries to swim across the Spree River to the west. Shots ring out. His body drifts for hours before anyone dares retrieve it. He becomes the first of many. The propaganda is relentless. The papers declare, the wall protects our peace. It defends socialism against fascist infiltration. You read it, incredulous, thinking it defends socialism from us. Yet slowly, shock gives way to numb routine. The city adjusts, as cities always do. Streets end abruptly. Train stations become ghost platforms. Friends joke that getting lost now requires state permission. The West protests, of course. Kennedy calls it a sad symbol of failure. But the world moves on, and the wall remains. You visit the border one evening, out of morbid curiosity. The setting sun throws long shadows across the concrete, the barbed wire glinting like a scar stitched by machine. You realize that, for the first time, the GDR feels permanent. The experiment has walled itself in. A quirky story makes the rounds. A local joke about a man who approaches the border guards and asks, "When will the wall be finished?" The soldier shrugs, when no one tries to climb it. The joke spreads quickly, too quickly. Within a week, people stop telling it. Someone, somewhere, probably didn't find it funny. And yet, even this prison has its strange kind of peace. The exodus stops. The bleeding ends. The party celebrates the success. The workers have chosen stability, Ulbricht announces. You look around at the empty streets and think, no, we just ran out of exits. But life, stubborn as moss, adapts. Children play soccer in alleys, using the wall as a goalpost. Lovers carve initials into its base. You see flowers growing through cracks in the mortar, bright red against the gray. Nature's small, defiant graffiti. And in the evenings, as curfew approaches, you still hear laughter drifting over from the western side, faint, echoing, untouchable. The wall will stand for decades, but on that first night, staring at its raw, unfinished face, you already understand the truth. It isn't meant to keep enemies out. It's meant to keep dreams in. You wake to silence, the kind that feels deliberate. It's early autumn, 1961, and Berlin has gone still. The noise of construction has faded, replaced by the low hum of watchtowers and the rustle of barbed wire in the wind. The wall now stands complete enough to be permanent, tall enough to cast a literal shadow across your street. You live maybe 6 blocks from it, yet it feels like a horizon, a place the sun never quite reaches. In the first weeks, people stand at its edge, staring across the concrete like it's the surface of another planet. Families wave through binoculars. Lovers shout across the divide until their voices crack. Children throw paper airplanes hoping they'll glide over. Most fall short. You wander there too, joining the silent crowd, because curiosity feels safer than despair. And though no one says it aloud, everyone understands the same quiet sentence. The world just got smaller. The party calls it stability. At last, our workers can live in peace. That's the official line, and it appears everywhere. On posters, in newspapers, even stitched onto banners above the factory gates. But you notice something else. The queues are shorter now, not because goods have returned, but because the people haven't. The government celebrates reduced unemployment. You call it simple math. Fewer mouths, fewer problems. Still, the strangest thing happens. Life continues. People adjust with the same grim efficiency that got them through war and ruin. You go to work, you queue for food, you pay your bills, you survive. Survival itself becomes an ideology. Historians later call this normalization, but you think of it as learning to breathe underwater. In time, the wall becomes part of the scenery. Children grow up thinking it was always there. School books describe it as a defensive measure against fascism. Teachers repeat the same story, sometimes with the blank expression of someone reciting from memory rather than belief. You keep your thoughts to yourself. The right kind of silence is a survival skill now. But for all its horror, the wall creates an odd illusion of calm. Crime drops, desertion stops, and for the first time, the GDR economy steadies. Factories finally meet quotas. The exodus no longer drains skilled workers. In early 1962, your factory even awards bonuses. Small, symbolic, but still enough to buy an extra loaf of bread or a bottle of cheap Polish vodka. You celebrate with your coworkers in a drafty hall, laughing louder than you should. It's not happiness, but it's the next best thing. Ulbricht, triumphant, announces a new slogan: Planmäßiger Aufbau des Sozialismus. Socialism built to plan. You roll your eyes. Even utopia needs a spreadsheet. But the government isn't wrong. Things do stabilize. Housing projects rise across cities, gray towers against gray skies. The Plattenbau apartments are plain but warm, and for the first time, many families have private bathrooms. One neighbor jokes, "We've entered the age of indoor socialism." Cultural life follows suit. The DEFA film studios churn out cheerful productions about heroic construction workers and loyal party members. You go to one screening out of boredom. The story is predictable. A saboteur tries to disrupt the collective farm, but is foiled by brave comrades. Still, the cinematography is beautiful, and you can't help admiring how skillfully propaganda can wear art's clothes. Not that the West forgets you. Western TV signals still slip through the air, uninvited but irresistible. You buy a small second-hand receiver and adjust the antenna just so, catching flickering images from ARD and ZDF. Comedies, commercials, talk shows filled with colors you didn't know existed. You turn the volume low and pull the curtains shut. For a half hour each evening, you live in another world. Then you switch it off before the neighbors hear the laughter that shouldn't exist. A quirky rumor circulates. A few state engineers have developed directional jammers to block Western frequencies, but the equipment's so faulty that half the time it interrupts East German broadcasts instead. You imagine Ulbricht shouting at a dead radio, and it's the funniest thing you've pictured in months. But the jokes fade when real tragedies begin. People still try to escape, digging tunnels, forging documents, leaping from upper windows into nets held by West Berlin firemen. You hear about one, a tailor named Peter Fechter, who tries to scale the wall near Checkpoint Charlie in August 1962. He's shot mid-climb, left to bleed in the open as guards watch. The West can't reach him, the East won't. For nearly an hour, he lies between worlds until he stops moving. His death becomes a symbol, though the newspapers call it an unfortunate provocation. You stop reading the papers for a while. The guards themselves seem uneasy. You notice their young faces, barely men, pacing the patrol routes with rifles slung awkwardly. Sometimes they wave at kids playing in nearby alleys. One even smiles. But by nightfall, they're different. Silhouettes behind floodlights. Strangers ready to obey. The GDR teaches them that duty and mercy are incompatible. You can't decide whether to pity them or fear them. By the mid-1960s, a kind of grim prosperity settles in. The GDR introduces ration reforms, increasing consumer goods. Radios, bicycles, and washing machines become easier to buy. If you're patient, there's a famous joke. How long is the waiting list for a Trabant car? Only 12 years. But if you pay now, it might arrive just in time for your retirement. Everyone laughs, including the Stasi agents, because even they can't get one faster. Historians still debate whether this period counts as success. The economy grows, literacy rates rise, women enter the workforce en masse, yet the shelves remain patchy and the borders sealed. It's as if the state traded freedom for furniture. You can't deny that for some, it's a good deal. For others, it's a slow suffocation. The regime works hard to sell the illusion of normalcy. Television shows feature smiling families enjoying state-subsidized holidays in the Baltic. The announcer's voice beams, "The workers' paradise by the sea." You know those resorts. You once applied to visit one and were denied because your employment sector was essential to production. You laugh darkly. Apparently, even the seaside must stay industrial. Still, there are small mercies. Music, for one. The authorities decide it's safer to control youth culture than to ban it entirely. Dance halls reopen, bands form, and rock music seeps through the cracks, repackaged as dance beat. You attend one concert in 1965 where a group covers the Beatles. Their lyrics changed to praise socialism. It's absurd and glorious. You dance anyway. Everywhere, you sense a paradox. People are learning how to be happy under constraint. You see it in faces on trams, in lovers' quiet gestures, in jokes whispered behind curtains. The GDR's greatest achievement, you think, is teaching people to improvise contentment. Yet, the cracks remain visible. You visit your aunt in Dresden and find she keeps a small collection of Western magazines hidden inside her sewing machine. "I like the pictures," she says. "They remind me that colors exist." You help her thread the needle, and both of you laugh quietly at the absurdity of it all. The most dangerous contraband in East Germany being a copy of Vogue. Meanwhile, Albrecht ages. His speeches grow slower, his mustache thinner, his confidence shakier. He boasts that our citizens need not envy anyone, while half the population tunes into Western TV under blankets. You can feel his grip loosening, even if the handcuffs haven't yet. One evening, you take a late walk along the wall. The floodlights hum. A guard's silhouette paces above. The air smells of damp concrete and cold metal. You run your fingers over the rough surface and imagine it as skin, scar tissue stretched over a wound that never healed. Somewhere beyond it, someone just like you is looking back, wondering the same thing. How long can a country live by pretending it's content? Historians will later call the 1960s the golden age of the GDR. You smile bitterly at that term. Gold, maybe, but fool's gold, glittering on the surface while rust eats away beneath. You turn for home, footsteps echoing off stone, the wall standing silent behind you. Massive, immovable, but not eternal. Even concrete, you remind yourself, has a way of cracking from the inside. You wake to the smell of rain on hot concrete, that peculiar metallic scent that clings to East German summers. It's 1967 now, and the wall, once raw and shocking, has blended into the background noise of your life. It's no longer the wall, it's just there, like gravity, like taxes, like the word comrade. The world has adjusted, and so have you. In your kitchen, the radio hums with the familiar optimism of state news. The announcer boasts that East Germany now produces more coal, more tractors, more textbooks than ever before. You sip your weak chicory coffee and look out the window at your neighbor struggling to start his Trabant. The irony writes itself. More tractors, fewer cars, you mutter. But even through the static of propaganda, something new is stirring. The regime, having walled itself in, turns its attention inward. The Ministry of State Security, the Stasi, has reached maturity. Once a secret police force, it's now an entire parallel society. You begin to feel its presence in everyday life, not through open brutality, but through subtle precision. Letters arrive with small tears in their envelopes, as if someone's been careless, or perhaps too careful. The phone clicks once before each call connects. At work, someone always asks oddly specific questions. "What do you think of Albrecht's new speech, comrade? Inspiring, isn't it?" You answer like everyone else. A cautious nod, a neutral phrase, the safest word in the GDR. Interesting. Historians still argue about how many informants the Stasi had. Some say 1 for every 60 citizens. Others claim even more. To you, the number doesn't matter. What matters is that it feels like everyone. You start second-guessing every conversation, even with friends you've known since childhood. One laughs too quickly at a joke about the party. Another suddenly owns a new coat during a time of scarcity. You stop visiting people without calling first. You stop saying much when you do. The Stasi develops new techniques too, not just arrests or threats, but something more insidious. Zersetzung, decomposition. Instead of imprisoning dissidents, they slowly dismantle them. They spread rumors, send fake letters, sabotage relationships. It's psychological warfare disguised as bureaucracy. You know one man, a teacher, accused of defeatist behavior. He isn't jailed, he's demoted, relocated, and divorced within 6 months. By the end of the year, he's drinking alone in a one-room apartment, convinced everyone hates him. That's the brilliance of Zersetzung. It leaves no martyrs, only ghosts. You sometimes wonder if it's happening to you. You find your apartment door unlocked one evening, though you remember locking it. A drawer you rarely open looks slightly disturbed. You tell yourself it's imagination. Paranoia is almost patriotic now. And yet, when you look at your reflection in the bathroom mirror, you can't help thinking how easy it would be for someone to file a report saying, "displays nervous behavior." Still, people find ways to live. The human spirit, it turns out, is remarkably adaptable, like ivy growing through cracks in the wall. You attend a friend's birthday party where the conversation tiptoes around politics but dives freely into gossip, movies, and music. Someone passes around a record, the Rolling Stones, illegally pressed on X-ray film. The faint, ghostly image of a ribcage spins on the turntable as "I can't get no" satisfaction fills the room. You laugh at the metaphor. Rebellion recorded over bone. The youth, especially, are restless. They wear Western clothes, listen to forbidden music, and dream of Prague, Paris, anywhere but here. You watch them dance in public parks, girls in miniskirts, boys with hair too long for Ulbricht's liking. The party calls them cultural deviants. You call them brave. When you were their age, you were learning to hide fear. They've learned to ignore it. A quirky but real fact from this time. The GDR briefly bans beat music after riots in Leipzig in 1965. Bands are dissolved, concerts canceled. But instead of crushing the movement, the ban only makes it fashionable. Every teenager suddenly wants a guitar. Even party officials' kids secretly tune in to Radio Luxembourg. You realize the regime has entered its most dangerous stage, trying to command emotion with policy. By 1968, global unrest seeps through the Iron Curtain like water through stone. You hear about protests in Paris, student uprisings in the West, the Prague Spring just to the south. When Czechoslovakia's Alexander Dubček promises socialism with a human face, you almost dare to hope. If they can reform, you whisper, maybe we can too. Then in August, you wake again to the sound of tanks, the same mechanical heartbeat that haunted your dreams since 1953. Soviet armor rolls into Prague, crushing reform under steel treads. The official GDR radio calls it fraternal assistance. You call it déjà vu. The next day, Ulbricht praises Moscow's steadfastness. You switch off the radio and stare at the wall, not the one in Berlin, but the invisible one inside your head that keeps hope from leaking out. Despite the repression, East German life remains strangely organized. Every detail is categorized, filed, and archived. You could spend a week doing paperwork for a broken refrigerator. The system runs on signatures, thousands of them, proof that control can be achieved by ink alone. You once joked to a friend, if Marx had foreseen this, he would have added a chapter about forms in triplicate. She doesn't laugh. A week later, you learn her cousin was questioned by the Stasi. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Yet amid the fear, the GDR continues its quiet, bureaucratic miracle. Full employment, universal healthcare, cheap housing. For many, that's enough. People trade freedom for predictability, danger for dullness. And dullness, if you squint hard enough, can look like peace. Your evenings settle into ritual. Work, dinner, the news at 7, filled with words like imperialist, productive efficiency, and peaceful victory. Then a book, or if you're feeling reckless, Western radio under your pillow. The static crackles like forbidden fire. Some nights you catch the Beatles' Hey Jude. The song fades in and out, but that chorus, take a sad song and make it better, seems written for your entire country. Historians will later call these years the gray time. Not because of despair, but because color itself had been replaced with uniformity. Even your dreams turn monochrome. Long corridors, gray skies, gray faces. But occasionally, something bright breaks through. A child's laughter, a foreign postcard smuggled in, a street performer juggling apples in defiance of gravity and authority. Those moments remind you that you're still alive, even if you're not quite free. In 1971, the rumor becomes fact. Ulbricht is out. Officially, he retires for health reasons. Unofficially, Moscow has grown tired of his rigidity. The new leader, Erich Honecker, promises reform and modernity. Real existing socialism, he calls it. The phrase of a man who knows the dream has faded, but refuses to wake up. For the first time in years, you feel a tremor of curiosity. Maybe this new era will loosen things. Maybe the state will learn to live with its citizens instead of against them. You've learned, of course, that maybe is a dangerous word in East Germany, but it's also the only one that keeps you going. That night, you step out onto your balcony. The city hums below, lights flickering through the mist. Somewhere in the distance, the wall stands patient and indifferent. You can't see it from here, but you know it's there, stretching like a scar through the darkness. You take a deep breath, taste the cool air, and whisper into the quiet, "We're still here." Because somehow, you are. Through ration cards and slogans, through fear and grayness, through the endless monotony of obedience, you've endured. And survival, you realize, might be the truest act of rebellion of all. You wake to the faint hum of your radiator, its pipes knocking like an impatient metronome. The calendar on the wall says 1972, though you stopped believing in calendars long ago. In the German Democratic Republic, years blend together the way shades of gray do. Distinguishable in theory, identical in practice. Still, something feels different this morning. Ulbricht is gone, and Erich Honecker now rules the Republic. His smile beams from newspapers and billboards promising unity between party and people. You can't help noticing that every new leader speaks of unity only after dividing something first. Honecker is younger, smoother, more modern, or so the propaganda insists. He talks about progress, modernization, and consumer socialism, a phrase that sounds suspiciously like an apology. The promise is clear. The new GDR will no longer ask you to sacrifice endlessly. It will reward your loyalty with comfort. For the first time, the party seems to understand what people have known for decades. Ideology doesn't fill stomachs. In the first months, there's visible change. Store shelves look less barren. Coffee and chocolate return, if only briefly. You even manage to buy a small black and white television after only 2 years on the waiting list. It sits like a shrine in your living room, broadcasting a world carefully edited for optimism. The announcers are crisp. The colors, when you eventually get a color model, oddly muted, as though filtered through state approval. You find it oddly comforting, in a numb sort of way, like being told everything's fine by someone who's paid to believe it. Historians later debate whether Honecker's rule began as genuine reform or simply smarter repression. At first, it feels like relief. Quotas are lowered, wages rise modestly, and suddenly everyone's talking about the better life. The regime launches its most ambitious program yet, Wohnungsbauprogramm, 1973, an enormous housing drive promising every citizen a modern apartment by the year 1990. Concrete blooms everywhere. The skyline fills with cranes, and for a moment, the GDR looks like it's actually building the future. You move into one of the new towers in 1975. It smells of fresh paint, damp plaster, and cautious hope. The elevator doesn't always work, but there's a private bathroom and, miracle of miracles, central heating. Standing on the balcony, you can see the outlines of the wall far to the west, a permanent horizon of reinforced silence. Sometimes you imagine it breathing, expanding slightly with each winter frost, exhaling the same cold air you feel on your face. For all its sterility, The 1970s GDR begins to look more prosperous. The party hosts exhibitions of shiny East German cars, color televisions, and washing machines. Made in the GDR becomes a proud slogan, stamped on everything from cameras to canned peas. There's an odd pride in those three letters. They mean survival, not luxury, but endurance. You attend a trade fair in Leipzig once, where officials brag that East German engineering rivals Japan's. You nod politely, knowing full well that even the elevator in your building sounds like a dying accordion. Yet beneath the optimism hums the same old fear. The Stasi expands its ranks. New informants sprout in offices, schools, and even churches. The illusion of comfort demands vigilance. If everyone seems content, anyone who isn't must be suspect. You hear stories of people questioned over the tone of their laughter or the direction of their gaze during party meetings. A new kind of repression emerges, one wrapped in wallpaper and family photographs. And yet, life does get easier in small ways. You can buy oranges at Christmas without standing in line for hours. The post office delivers Western parcels, coffee, chocolate, even Levi's jeans, sent by relatives abroad. The packages smell like freedom, or at least capitalism. But the party handles them carefully. Every box opened, every label checked, every receipt recorded. You sign for your gifts as though borrowing them. A quirky but true story circulates about a GDR customs officer who confiscated a West German Barbie doll, declaring it ideologically unsound. 2 months later, a local factory produced its own version, Bärbel, Die Sozialistische Puppe. Bärbel wore sensible shoes and worked in a laboratory. The joke writes itself, and everyone tells it, quietly. Even so, the mood feels lighter than it did a decade ago. Western influences slip through the cracks. Fashion magazines, vinyl records, slang. You see teenagers wearing bell-bottoms, painting peace signs, quoting John Lennon's Imagine. The party tries to co-opt it all, insisting that youth culture thrives under socialism. Somewhere in the ministry, a bureaucrat probably believes it. In 1976, a poet named Wolf Biermann performs in West Germany. A small concert, nothing grand, but he criticizes the GDR while abroad, and Honecker's government strips him of his citizenship overnight. It's a warning to anyone who mistakes tolerance for freedom. You listen to his banned songs on smuggled cassette tapes, rough recordings passed hand to hand like contraband prayers. In them, Biermann sings, "Only he who stays true to himself stays free." You can't help but think how small a country must be if it fears a man with a guitar. Meanwhile, the party keeps tightening its grip with bureaucratic politeness. To travel abroad, you now need a dozen documents: proof of loyalty, letters of invitation, and the elusive Reisegenehmigung. You apply once, partly out of curiosity, and are told, unfortunately, your presence is essential to the construction of socialism. It's almost flattering to be considered essential until you realize so is everyone else. Still, the consumer world Honecker promised keeps expanding. Color television broadcasts begin in 1969, but become common by the mid-70s. You watch East German coverage of the 1972 Munich Olympics. Proud, selective, euphoric. Athletes are hailed as symbols of socialist superiority, their victories choreographed into national mythology. When East German swimmer Cornelia Ender wins gold after gold, the newspapers call her proof of the socialist body. You cheer, not knowing yet about the steroids, the pressure, the ruined health that would come to light decades later. Back then, glory feels pure. The contradiction of the era is almost comic. The government preaches equality, but privilege quietly re-emerges. Party elites shop at special stores, drive imported Volvos, and vacation in Bulgaria. Ordinary citizens get rationed meat and a 3-year wait for a telephone. You start calling it socialism by queue. The longer the line, the more democratic it feels. And yet, amid the absurdity, there are moments of real warmth. Neighborhood committees organize summer festivals. People share beer, sausages, and songs until midnight. Children ride bikes through courtyards. Old women water communal gardens. Life at ground level remains tender, stubbornly human. You learn again what you learned after the war. Systems can dictate structure, but not spirit. By 1979, you've settled into a strange peace. You work, you laugh, you love cautiously. The wall still stands, the slogans still echo, but the urgency of fear has faded into habit. People have stopped believing change will come, and that resignation itself becomes freedom of a sort. Historians will later describe this period as the domestication of dictatorship. You prefer to think of it as a long pause, the moment when history holds its breath, because deep down you can sense the tension building again. The economy is slowing, debts to the West are rising, and young people, raised on color TV and disco, have grown immune to slogans. You don't know it yet, but the cracks are widening. The same cracks you once saw in the plaster of your new apartment. You finish your coffee, watching the steam drift toward the window, and wonder whether the future will arrive quietly, like morning fog, or suddenly, like a siren. Either way, you tell yourself, you'll be ready. You've learned patience from history, the kind that keeps people standing through storms. And somewhere outside, beyond the gray skyline, the wall stands as silent proof that nothing built from fear lasts forever. It just waits for the right moment to crumble. You wake to the soft hum of the television, a Sunday morning rerun of Der Schwarze Kanal, the state's most unintentionally hilarious show. The host, Karl Eduard von Schnitzler, sneers through the screen, dissecting Western lies with the zeal of a priest performing an exorcism. You can't help grinning. Even the cat looks bored. It's 1980, and the GDR, your GDR, has become a land of rituals. Morning propaganda, afternoon cues, evening jokes whispered under low lamps. Outside, the air smells faintly of coal dust and bureaucracy. The housing blocks look the same, gray slabs punctuated by television antennas like metallic weeds. And yet, beneath the monotony, something has changed. The young no longer pretend to believe. They listen to Bowie, trade jeans, and laugh openly at slogans that once terrified their parents. It's not rebellion, not yet, but it's erosion. The slow, quiet kind that makes mountains crumble. You see it in your students. Yes, you're teaching now. Literature, of all things. You tell them Goethe, Heine, Brecht. The party wants you to emphasize revolutionary humanism. You, however, emphasize humanity. When you read Faust, you skip the parts about duty and dwell on yearning. They catch it, the subtle defiance in your tone. One girl, no older than 20, asks softly, "Do you think freedom is possible here?" You pause before answering. Freedom begins in the sentence, not in the street. She smiles. The next week her seat is empty. Transferred, they say. You never find out where. Honecker's consumer socialism trudges onward. The party boasts of new production records, but the reality is a quiet decay. Machines age faster than workers can replace them. Power plants run on fumes and optimism. Still, there's color now. Bright polyester, gaudy wallpaper, state-approved disco. The GDR has entered its awkward teenage years, trying desperately to look modern while stuck in a 1950s mindset. The state even launches a new campaign, Einheit von Wirtschaft und Sozialpolitik, Unity of Economic and Social Policy. You translate it privately as, "We're broke, but we'll smile about it." You can feel the contradiction everywhere. The streets are clean, the trains on time, but the air of weariness seeps through every smile. People queue politely for oranges that never arrive. You once overhear a shopkeeper say, "We're always building the future, but we never get to live in it." That line could win a poetry prize if poetry were allowed to be that honest. Still, the GDR knows how to create spectacle. Every May Day, parades roll through the boulevards. Children waving flags, soldiers marching, brass bands blaring through drizzle. You stand among the crowd, clapping when expected. It's choreographed unity, but for a few minutes it almost feels genuine. A little boy on his father's shoulders waves a red balloon and shouts, "Peace and socialism!" His father murmurs, "Peace will do." You smile. Even cynicism sounds gentle when it's whispered in a crowd. In 1983, something unthinkable happens. The West lends the GDR money, a capitalist loan to a socialist state. The irony is exquisite. Honecker smiles for cameras beside Franz Josef Strauss, the arch-conservative Bavarian leader, both men pretending history hasn't turned inside out. The party calls it a step toward détente. You call it a mortgage on illusion. Yet, the money helps, at least temporarily. Western goods appear again. Bananas, Nescafe, even Coca-Cola in select stores. You remember the taste, sweet and chemical, like nostalgia mixed with defiance. But these luxuries come at a cost: dependence. The GDR now survives on Western credit, each mark borrowed against the promise of faith that no one truly has anymore. Meanwhile, the Stasi grows even more invasive. By the mid-1980s, it's estimated that nearly 1 in 7 citizens has some link to them: a cousin, a coworker, a friend. You joke that you've probably been reported so many times you deserve a loyalty card. But privately, you're cautious. Letters to friends in the West are short, formal, empty of meaning. Even love must pass through censorship. One evening, while grading papers, you find a note slipped under your door. No name, no address, just a single typed sentence. You are being watched. You stare at it for a long time. Is it a threat? A warning? A prank? Eventually, you burn it in the ashtray, watching the letters curl into black dust. The flame feels comforting. At least fire tells the truth. Still, beneath the fear, life continues with an almost absurd normalcy. You celebrate birthdays, argue over football matches, complain about electricity shortages. You learn to fix everything: shoes, radios, chairs, because replacing things is impossible. The unofficial motto of East Germany becomes, "Wir improvisieren, also sind wir." We improvise, therefore we are. A quirky moment sticks with you from 1984. A coworker wins a long-awaited car, a Trabant 601. It's a national event. The entire factory gathers as he drives it off the lot, blue smoke trailing behind like incense. The car wheezes, rattles, and smells faintly of melted glue, but everyone cheers. You join in too, because hope, no matter how small or smoky, still counts as progress. Culturally, the GDR tries to reinvent itself. Films become subtler, art more daring in its metaphors. Directors like Frank Bayer and Conrad Wolf manage to slip truth through the cracks of censorship. You see Jacob der Lügner, Jacob the Liar, a story of a man who invents good news to keep people hopeful in a ghetto. The audience leaves in silence, no applause needed. Everyone understands the metaphor. By 1985, even Honecker can't ignore the changing winds. The Soviet Union has a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, preaching glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. The words float across Europe like the first warm breeze of spring. You listen to Gorbachev's speeches on a crackling radio and think, he sounds like someone who actually believes in people. Honecker, of course, calls these reforms premature. You know what that means. They're forbidden. And yet, the ideas spread. Students quote Gorbachev in debates. Intellectuals discuss him in kitchens over cheap vodka. If the Soviet Union can change, someone says, why can't we? You don't answer, because you've learned that silence is safer and sometimes louder. In 1986, the Chernobyl disaster shakes the Eastern Bloc to its core. Official news minimizes the danger, claiming no significant impact. You walk outside the next day, feeling the drizzle on your skin, wondering if the government can censor radiation too. Mothers keep children indoors. Farmers plow contaminated soil because orders are orders. Trust evaporates faster than rain. The GDR tries to carry on as if nothing has happened. New slogans appear, cheerfully absurd. The future is socialist. Forward to the peace of tomorrow. You can't help muttering, forward, yes, but to where? By the late 1980s, you notice something strange in the air, a restlessness, a vibration, like the low hum before an approaching train. Churches begin holding peace prayers. Artists hold exhibitions with double meanings. People stop whispering quite so quietly. Even the Stasi can't file fast enough to keep up. You start teaching Heine again. His line about thoughts being free. The students giggle nervously, but none look away. Freedom, you realize, is like a seed. You can bury it, fence it, starve it, but it never dies. It waits. On New Year's Eve, 1988, you stand on your balcony, watching fireworks explode over the gray city. They're modest, state-approved and symmetrical, but beautiful nonetheless. You raise your glass and whisper to the cold air, "Happy New Year, old world." Because you can feel it, even if you can't name it yet, the sound of something cracking beneath the concrete calm. You wake to church bells, not the muffled kind you're used to, but ringing, clear, defiant. It's a Monday morning in Leipzig, October 1989. You're not a religious person, but the sound feels holy. The bells echo through Plagwitz and across Karl Marxplatz, summoning people not to worship, but to witness. The city has been stirring for weeks now. Every Monday, crowds gather at St. Nicholas Church for Friedensgebete, prayers for peace. What began as quiet vigils has swelled into something bigger, something dangerous, something unstoppable. You put on your coat, step into the crisp autumn air, and join the stream of people moving toward the city center. Students, workers, mothers pushing prams, pensioners clutching candles, thousands of them. The banners they carry are small, hand-painted, humble. Freiheit. Wir sind das Volk. We are the people. You can taste the fear, but it's laced with adrenaline. For 30 years, you've learned to keep your head down, to whisper behind curtains, to sign whatever needed signing. But now, something inside you refuses to bow. Maybe it's Gorbachev's glasnost giving everyone courage. Maybe it's the television images of Poland and Hungary loosening their borders. Maybe it's simply time. Historians will later say the GDR didn't collapse, it exhaled. Decades of pressure finally found a crack, and today you can hear it. The collective breath of a nation, remembering what it feels like to speak. The streets pulse with chants. Keine Gewalt, no violence. It's not just a plea, it's a strategy. Everyone knows the risk. The Stasi is everywhere, the police outnumbered but armed. You spot their helmets glinting under streetlights, their dogs restless. A woman beside you, mid-40s, teacher's coat, trembling hands, holds her candle so tightly the wax drips onto her skin. She doesn't flinch. The march swells, stretching for blocks, candles glowing like fireflies in a sea of darkness. Someone passes you a flyer, thin paper, printed in secret. Freedom is not granted, it is taken. You slip it into your pocket and keep walking. The slogans shift. We are the people becomes we are one people. A subtle but seismic change. It's no longer about reform, it's about reunification. For the first time since 1945, those words don't feel like treason. They feel like truth. You pass the city's main police building, its windows dark, its curtains drawn. You imagine the officers inside, watching the crowd through slits in the blinds. Do they feel fear or envy? Maybe both. Historians still debate whether the authorities hesitated because they'd lost control or because they'd finally regained conscience. Whatever the reason, the guns stay silent. That night, when you return home, your legs ache, but your heart feels light. You turn on the news, state television still pretending nothing is happening. Citizens continue to support the policies of the Socialist Unity Party, the anchor announces with brittle cheer. You laugh, almost choking. The image on screen, an empty square, is only a few blocks from where you just marched among 70,000. Over the next weeks, the protests spread like wildfire. Dresden, Berlin, Erfurt, Magdeburg, every city joins in. Factories slow down, offices empty. The people have found their rhythm, their courage, their voice. Even the church bells seem to ring louder. You attend every Monday, each one bigger than the last. By late October, Leipzig's demonstrations exceed 300,000. The chants shake the old facades. The city feels alive again. And then, the unthinkable happens. The borders around Hungary and Czechoslovakia open. Thousands of East Germans flood across, camping in embassies, crossing through back roads, waving passports that suddenly mean something again. You watch the exodus on Western television and realize the old cage is cracking faster than anyone imagined. Within the party, panic reigns. Honecker, sick, old, and blind to reality, is quietly replaced by Egon Krenz, who promises reform in the spirit of socialism. The words sound recycled. You barely bother to scoff. The people have already moved beyond slogans. By early November, the tension is unbearable. Rumors swirl of travel reforms, that the government might finally allow limited visits to the West. You don't dare believe it. You've heard promises before. Then comes November 9th, 1989. You're grading papers when the phone rings. It's a friend shouting, "Turn on the TV, now." You do, and see chaos. An East German official, Günter Schabowski, is giving a live press conference. He fumbles with his notes, muttering something about a new law allowing private travel abroad. A journalist asks, "When does this take effect?" Schabowski, confused, says the words that change history. "As far as I know, immediately." You sit frozen. Immediately. Minutes later, crowds surge toward Berlin's checkpoints. Bornholmer Strasse, Invalidenstrasse, Checkpoint Charlie. Border guards, unprepared, call superiors who don't answer. The order never comes. And so, in the absence of command, something miraculous happens. They open the gates. You grab your coat and run. The streets are electric. People spilling out of apartments, laughing, crying, running. Trams stop mid-route as passengers jump off and head westward on foot. You see strangers hugging. Old women waving flags they'd hidden for decades. The city hums like a heartbeat rediscovered. When you reach the wall, the scene is beyond words. Crowds climb atop it, hammers in hand, chipping away at the concrete. Each blow echoes like thunder. Soldiers stand nearby, motionless, uncertain whether to stop it or join in. One finally smiles and lights a cigarette. You take it as permission. You press your hand against the cold wall. Solid, immovable, absurd. Then, almost without thinking, you reach up, grab a shard, and pull. The stone gives way easily. A piece of history, rough and pale, crumbles into your palm. On the other side, West Berliners cheer and offer beer bottles, flowers, candy. You climb over, trembling, laughing, crying all at once. The air feels different, lighter somehow. The lights are dazzling, the noise deafening. For the first time in your life, no one checks your papers. No one asks who you are. Historians will call it the fall of the Berlin Wall. But to you, it feels like something far smaller and infinitely larger, the collapse of a long, gray dream. You walk the western streets until dawn, dizzy with disbelief. A man you've never met hugs you, presses a Marlboro into your hand and says, "Welcome home." You try to thank him but can't find the words. That night, the two Berlins, once enemy twins, merge in a spontaneous carnival. People dance atop the wall, champagne spilling into history. You think of everyone who didn't live to see this, those who fled, those who fell, those who stayed. You whisper their names into the wind, hoping the city hears. When morning comes, you sit by the Spree River, holding that chunk of concrete in your lap. It's heavier than you expected. The sunrise paints the skyline gold, glinting off cranes and ruins and the bright eyes of people who've suddenly remembered how to dream. You don't know what comes next. Reunification, chaos, capitalism, confusion. But for once, uncertainty feels like freedom. And as the church bells ring again in the distance, you realize that sound, the one you first heard in Leipzig, was never really about faith. It was about resurrection. The city is awake. The country is breathing. And you, after 40 years behind a wall, finally feel the air move through your lungs without permission. You wake to sunlight. Not the dim gray dawn that always seemed to hang above the GDR like a curtain, but real light, sharp, golden, almost too bright to look at. It's 1990, and for the first time in half a century, you live in a country that isn't divided, occupied, or pretending. The radio plays pop songs without static, and the announcer's voice sounds giddy, untrained in freedom. Outside your window, the old border guards towers are being dismantled one by one. Someone has painted Danke Leipzig in red letters on a surviving wall slab. Reunification, they call it. A single word that tries to cover everything. Relief, chaos, nostalgia, greed, joy, confusion. On the 3rd of October 1990, the ceremony in Berlin declares that the German Democratic Republic accedes to the Federal Republic. In truth, it dissolves into it, like salt in water, leaving only traces. You watch the televised signing, the flags raised, the fireworks bursting above the Brandenburg Gate. People cry. You cry too, though you're not sure whether from happiness or vertigo. The weeks that follow are dizzying. Deutschmarks replace Eastmarks. Suddenly your life savings feel like monopoly money. Western supermarkets open in old state-owned stores, dazzling with color. Aisles of fruit, cereal boxes shouting in fonts that seem to vibrate. The first time you walk into one, you nearly laugh aloud. So many kinds of yogurt, you think. Capitalism, your neighbor whispers reverently, like naming a new god. The city changes overnight. Billboards appear where propaganda once stood. Cars roar through streets that smelled of bicycles and coal dust. Street names shift back. Karl Marx Allee becomes Frankfurter Allee again. Leninplatz reverts to Landsberger. Even the air feels different, sweeter somehow, though maybe that's just the scent of gasoline and optimism. Historians later describe this as Die Wende, the turning point. You live it as whiplash. For every victory, a small loss. The comforting routines vanish. The security of sameness evaporates. Factories close. Entire industries deemed inefficient. The word Treuhand, the agency tasked with privatizing East German enterprises, enters everyday speech like a curse. One morning, your factory receives its letter. Liquidation. The machines you tended for decades are to be sold for scrap. You stand outside with hundreds of others holding your redundancy notice. Some cheer, saying, "At least we're free." Others stare at the ground. You feel both emotions at once, as though two countries still exist inside your chest. Freedom tastes different when it's laced with unemployment. Yet not everything feels bleak. Families reunite after decades apart. Cousins from Hamburg visit, laughing at your outdated appliances and insisting on taking you shopping. You ride the intershop escalator for the first time, amazed by how smooth it is. You buy your first pair of Western shoes, expensive, soft, absurdly comfortable. For a moment you feel weightless. Still, a question hums beneath every conversation. Who are we now? The Westerners call you Aussies, Easties, half affectionate, half condescending. You smile politely, though the word burns. They mean well, but their world feels faster, louder, less patient. They laugh at your habits, saving jars, fixing things, keeping bread in linen cloth. They call it nostalgia when you miss the old ways, nostalgia for the East. Maybe it is, or maybe it's just mourning for a life that, for all its absurdity, made sense. You visit friends in your old district. The familiar Plattenbau blocks look smaller now, almost fragile. Some residents have hung West German flags from balconies. Others still fly the red GDR banner. Between them hangs laundry, socks, shirts, a child's small red scarf fluttering in the wind. The Republic still clings, your friend jokes. You both know he's right. In churches, people pray for guidance. In bars, they toast to capitalism. In unemployment offices, they wait. The Western newspapers call it blühende Landschaften, blooming landscapes, quoting Chancellor Kohl's promise that the East will soon flourish. You walk through the gray industrial outskirts and think, not yet. But amid the confusion, something quietly beautiful unfolds. Truth. Archives open, secrets spill out like dust from old drawers. The Stasi files become public, and citizens queue for hours to read them. You join the line, heart pounding. When your folder arrives, thick, yellowed, your name stamped in heavy ink, you hesitate before opening it. Inside, reports, transcripts, photographs. They documented your lectures, your jokes, even your phone calls. One note reads, "Subject expresses skepticism toward party slogans, but remains professionally competent." You laugh, then cry. Someone had listened to your life as though it were a radio broadcast. You wonder who it was. Later, you find out. A colleague, an old friend. You meet her in a cafe. Both of you older, softer, uncertain how to begin. She says, "They told me it was for your safety." You nod, unable to hate her. The past feels too heavy for anger. You pay for her coffee. The younger generation, those born after the wall went up, adapt fastest. They master credit cards, computer jobs, travel abroad. They call the GDR history, though to you it's memory, still warm. You envy their ease, but not their amnesia. When one student asks, "What was it really like back then?" you tell her, "Imagine living your whole life in a waiting room, and one day the door opens, but you're not sure what's outside." By 1992, the old borders have faded into traffic routes. Where checkpoints once stood, cafes now serve lattes. The wall's remains are sold as souvenirs, fragments in plastic boxes, labeled authentic history. You still keep your piece from that night in '89, rough and gray, on your bookshelf. Not as a trophy, but as proof that barriers, however solid, can vanish overnight. And yet, sometimes, you miss the simplicity, the predictability of a world with fewer choices. In the new supermarkets, abundance feels overwhelming. You catch yourself longing for the familiar gray tin of cafe mix you once despised. Maybe freedom, like coffee, is strongest when it's a little bitter. You begin writing again. Memoirs, essays, little observations. Publishers are suddenly interested in East German voices, provided they sound tragic enough. You refuse to be tragic. "We were not all victims," you write. "We built, we loved, we endured. Even behind walls, life bloomed." The editor nods politely, trimming your sentences for brevity. You don't mind. You've learned patience. One afternoon, you visit Berlin. The city hums with cranes and chatter, old and new interlaced like patchwork. Tourists swarm the Brandenburg Gate, snapping photos on the exact spot where soldiers once stood with rifles. You walk to Potsdamer Platz, now a neon skyline where there used to be emptiness. It's beautiful, but a little too bright. You whisper, "Slow down," though the city doesn't hear. In a small museum near Checkpoint Charlie, you see a display. Children's shoes found in escape tunnels, a rusted Trabant door, a wall segment covered in graffiti. One message, scrawled in faded paint, catches your eye. This wall fell because people remembered they were human. You stand there a long time, reading it over and over, until the guard gently taps your shoulder at closing time. You take the train home, watching the fields roll past, green now, free of barbed wire. Cows graze where once there were watchtowers. You think of all the versions of yourself that lived and died in this land. The cautious worker, the silent protester, the teacher, the survivor. They coexist inside you like layers of old paint. Sometimes you still dream of the East, not as ideology, but as place. The smell of coal stoves in winter, the rhythm of factory whistles, the steady predictability of gray mornings. But then you wake, sunlight streaming through an unbarred window, and remind yourself that nostalgia is not truth. It's memory softened by mercy. You still walk past the remaining wall fragments sometimes, now covered in bright murals. Tourists touch them reverently. Children climb them like playgrounds. You smile. The wall that once divided the world now belongs to everyone, even the ones who never felt its shadow. And in that, you find peace. Because life in the GDR, for all its contradictions, wasn't just oppression. It was living, imperfect and stubborn. It was mothers tucking in children, lovers meeting in trams, workers singing after shifts. It was ordinary people making something human out of the machinery of control. You breathe in the open air, hearing again those Leipzig bells in memory, their echo still ringing through time. The sound isn't sorrow or triumph, it's continuity. Freedom, you realize, isn't the opposite of captivity. It's the ability to remember without permission. And now, as night falls, you let the story settle like dust on quiet streets. The voices of that vanished world fade into the hum of present-day Berlin. Trams gliding, cafe laughter, the low rustle of trees where barbed wire once cut the sky. You picture those candlelit marches again, each small flame trembling against the dark, each one a whisper that refused to go out. You breathe slowly, letting the decades drift past. Rubble turning to pavement, slogans to silence, walls to memory. The faces you met, the farmers, students, guards, poets, blur together into one long human thread, weaving from 1945 to this very moment. All of them searching, stumbling, surviving. The noise of history softens now. You can almost hear footsteps in wet leaves, the faint whistle of an evening train crossing what used to be a border. Somewhere, a child laughs, free to travel anywhere, never knowing how rare that once was. So you close your eyes and imagine the city at peace. No tanks, no slogans, just the steady rhythm of breathing. The wall is gone, but the lessons remain. That endurance can be quiet, that hope can outlast concrete, and that truth, once spoken, never fully disappears. The candle you held in Leipzig still burns somewhere, passed from hand to hand, from memory to memory. You can rest now. History, for once, is moving gently. Sleep well, traveler. The night is calm. The air is free.